You need to accept getting poorer. That was the message this week from Hugh Pill, the chief economist of the Bank of England. He told a podcast from the Columbia Law School in the United States this. Somehow in the UK, someone needs to accept that they're worse off and stop trying to maintain their real spending power by bidding up prices, whether higher wages or passing the energy cost through onto customers, etc. And what we're facing now is that reluctance to accept that, yes, we're all worse off, and we all have to take our share to try and pass that cost on to one of our compatriots and say, we'll be all right, but they will have to take our share too. That pass the parcel game that's going on here, that game is one that's just generating inflation, and that part of inflation can persist. So that's his message. If we all try and maintain our incomes, then we'll all lose out. Now, to be fair to Hugh Pill, he did point out that businesses as well as workers should be accepting less money. So he says that they shouldn't pass on energy costs to consumers. So presumably he's saying they should take a hit to their profits, which is reasonable. I'm not sure how much the Bank of England is doing to ensure that can happen. I suppose it's more of an issue for central government. In any case, the comments have, again, very understandably, infuriated many people in Britain. And that's especially because we're seeing headlines like this. Britons need to accept they're poorer, says Bank of England economist. And that comes in the same week as headlines like this. This is the FT. Will the extraordinary boom in luxury goods ever end? So one day we've got Britons need to accept they're poorer. Then we've got the FT. Will the extraordinary boom in luxury goods ever end? So that sounds like there are certainly a few people accepting they still are very much not poor. The injustice of it all wasn't lost on the audience of Question Time this week. This intervention was especially strong.
We were told after the last financial crash, like 10 years ago, okay, you have to put up with like no pay rises for now. So it's been 10 years on. So my generation, so I would have graduated about 2010. We've never had a pay rise in line with inflation. Like people are putting off having families, buying homes, all of that stuff. And when you look, I think the other part of it is looking at the consequences of these political decisions. So if, for example, you put the burden of tax on those who are the most vulnerable, they are going to have to choose between doing very extreme things like, do I buy my medication? Do I buy food? If you put the tax burden on the very rich, it's like, okay, I have a slightly smaller bank balance at the end of the year, but you're still rich. You're still a billionaire. And the other thing I'd like to say, when I say rich, I don't mean people who are on like 100,000, 200,000. We're talking about the people who have billions. Like you have people in this country who have billions. You can never spend it in a lifetime. You could never spend it in 10 lifetimes. Like, why is it that you're then putting the burden on people who have no money? Like, it doesn't make sense.
If it's an annual income of £100,000, that does make you rich. And I think the tax should be higher on you. But I mean, the broader point is correct. And I think especially pertinent when we're looking at luxury goods companies booming. He's saying that if we tax billionaires, they're not going to notice, right? I think the reason luxury goods are booming is because there are so many people with so much money to spend. They need something to do with their money, so they end up buying luxury goods, especially which sometimes they think might increase in value.
That's extraordinary, isn't it, Michael? And you've talked about Louis Vuitton's parent company there, the most valuable company in Europe. There are other ones too. You look at, for instance, I think Dior, they're in the top 10 companies in Europe by market capitalization. Hermes is worth $225 billion. Dior's worth $165 billion. Their value is just rocketing up. You had, I think, the managing director of Harrods say last month, business has returned to pre-pandemic levels. They say statistically, people just get, the rich get richer in a recession. That's just how it is. Well, it's not necessarily how it is. It's how it is right now. So you basically have open admission by the 1% here, managing director of Harrods, saying that actually this recession is working out just fine for them. The rich don't just spend their surplus money on luxury goods. Even worse, they spend the money on assets. So they've got too much money to spend. They literally can't spend it quickly enough, as that gentleman said there. Not just billionaires, millionaires too. What do? They buy assets to generate more wealth, to generate more incomes. Now, of course, that can be forms of, national debt, sovereign debt, US gilts, British gilts, US treasuries. It can be precious metals. But it can also be things like bricks and mortar, buildings. Because being a landlord is still just about, even though interest rates are high, especially if you're buying a place cash, it's actually quite lucrative. It is not good for the majority of people, for a minority of the ultra rich to get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. There was this sort of platitude really for the last 40 years. Well, we're going to permit income inequality to rise if it means that the very poorest also get richer, right? The rising tide lifts all boats. sounds good, but in reality, that's not what happens. You create a layer of the ultra rich. They literally have too much money to spend. They invest that in assets. Those assets have to find returns. They find returns by impoverishing other people, right? By driving up the cost of rent because you're buying a house and you become a landlord. Or they drive up the cost of university accommodation because people are buying stocks in these giant building companies that specialize in building something called purpose-built student accommodation, PBSAs. So it's very, very, very bad with regards to that young man. I just do not understand how, yes, of course, he was applauded. Some people are just older men, it should be said. I'm not saying all old men are right-wing, but it should be said. It's an observation. They were just sat there not really clapping. I do not understand how people cannot say or grasp the fact that billionaires and millionaires need to be paying more money in tax. It is good for everyone. Even if you're a pro-competition, pro-liberal market capitalist, it is good for what you want. This is not a stable situation politically, and it's leading to economic inertia. So well done, that man. And as you've said at the top here, the fact that luxury brands are seeing their value just go up and up, clearly we're not all getting poorer.
The one silver lining to the boom in luxury goods is it's better for the rich people to be buying luxury goods than to be buying our houses. Let's look in a bit more detail at the Financial Times article on luxury brands that I showed you the headline of earlier. And this is how the article starts. Sharon Wong had decided she had earned a little indulgence as she browsed at Louis Vuitton in La Samaritaine, don't know if that's how you pronounce it, department store, one of Paris's marquee luxury shopping destinations. It's expensive, but I've been thinking about it for a few months, the 30-something marketing manager from London said as she examined models of the Petit Sac Blanc, a small rectangular bag which costs about €1,500. I save a bit. I think about them as investments. The top names will always have value, especially the styles with history. Around the corner, they write, a clutch of suited Italians and a German family milled in the lobby of the 5-star Cheval Blanc Hotel, where rooms start at about €2,200 a night, and staff said occupancy was running at 70% and above. The hotel, La Samaritaine and Louis Vuitton, have one thing in common. They are all part of LVMH. The family-controlled luxury conglomerate was built into a powerhouse by Bernard Arnault through serial acquisitions since the 1990s, giving his family a fortune that is now worth about $212 billion. Of course, while some of that success of the luxury goods market is down to the rise of the middle class in countries like China, so not necessarily a story about inequality here, it is also a story about inequality here because it is driven by the rise of the super rich in Europe and America as well. Charts from the Financial Times show year-on-year growth in revenue from different world regions. In the fourth chart, you can see the growth in Asia, excluding Japan. So this is mainly going to be China, really. You can see there's been sustained growth in demand above 10% a year. So you see that would really boom. That would really sort of give a boost to those industries. In Europe, though, where we're supposedly facing a cost of living crisis, the growth in demand for luxuries is also huge. Let's zoom in on Europe now. You can see that throughout the 2010s, when the rest of us were suffering from austerity, there was sustained growth of between 5 and 10% a year in demand for luxury goods. That fell by 29% in 2020 during the lockdown, or the lockdowns across Europe, but the rebound was dramatic. So in 2021, revenue increased by 30%, so completely making up for the pandemic fall. Then in 2022, it rose by another 35%. So all of those losses were made up in a year, and now revenue is a third higher than it was for the pandemic for luxury goods.
The Financial Times had to rename their weekly supplement from How to Spend It to HTSI. The How to Spend It supplement had to literally be renamed because they understand the politics around that now are awful. The optics, as some people in marketing and branding like to say. You know, this idea that particularly centre-right politicians and Labour as well, let's be frank. So look, it's easy to talk about billionaires and millionaires. It's really easy to make them sort of these cartoonish villain characters. Jeff Bezos literally can't talk because his face is so puffed up from taking human growth hormone and testosterone and Botox. He's literally going into space with, Captain Kirk. Of course he's cartoonish. Elon Musk is, of course, a very cartoonish character. So no, when you say that there are evil, cartoonish billionaires and millionaires, they are, the avatars of our society. They do exist. And the idea that, oh no, that's just the willful, whimsical imaginations of the left. Watch a TV program. If there's no wealthy people, why do you think Succession is such a successful TV series? Or White Lotus? You think those people don't exist? They've been made up by some screenwriter in Hollywood? No. That is accurately depicting a runaway class of billionaires and millionaires, particularly in Anglo-America, who have too much money. They have so much money, they literally don't know how to spend it. Kendall Roy is literally a critique of the society that we live in. You know, Logan Roy, played by Brian Cox, and Brian Cox is quite explicit about this. You know, these are awful people. These are literally the worst human beings in our society. Those people exist. Rupert Murdoch has billions of pounds. His children will inherit a huge fortune. What did Murdoch do? What's his legacy? His legacy is fundamentally holding back action on climate change by several decades and building in populist right-wing hegemony in countries like the UK, Australia, and the United States for 30 years, which frankly means that all of these countries are in long-term political and economic decline. And as a result, he's a billionaire. So yes, there are very wealthy people, despite what centre-right, centre-left, purportedly centre-left, centre-right, let's be frank, they mostly just agree on the rich getting richer. That's what both parties should be called, the rich getting richer parties. Despite what they say, oh, there's actually not that much money around. There's a hell of a lot of money around. It's on Amazon. It's on HBO. It's in the market capitalization figures of firms like Louis Vuitton and Dior and and it's in the literal words of the managing director of Harrods when he says that in a recession, the rich get richer. He's not saying that for fun. He's not a socialist. He's not pals with Mick Lynch. He's saying it because it's true.